Hello, Read Through the Word friends. Welcome, and today is Saturday, December 7th, and I'm super glad that you are here with me today. Today we are talking about the book of Ephesians, and our key verse for today comes from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. I'm going to read them real quick here. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, and one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. So I would like to break down just a couple things in those verses. The first thing that I want to talk about is in verses 1 and 2, when Paul tells people to be completely humble and gentle. So ancient Greek culture did not necessarily view this idea, the kind of humility that Paul is talking about, this meekness, this gentleness, this self-sacrifice, that kind of had a negative connotation in Greek culture. It was seen, the qualities, the way Paul described, would have been seen almost as a weakness. Now, certainly in ancient Greek culture, there were virtues that they espoused, that rulers would say that they lived by. And though they would not completely, discount this idea of gentleness, it was not in the way that Paul described. This really almost extreme gentleness is probably what it would have been received as in ancient Greek culture. So these ideas of meekness, unless of course it was, and I'm looking at my commentary here, the Bible background commentary, it says unless it was socially appropriate self-abasement of a social inferior to a superior. So unless it was something kind of like, almost like a groveling, a self-abasement, you're higher on the pole than I am, therefore I have to. But that's not the genuine kind of humility that Paul is talking about. So this was definitely one of the ways that early Christianity really set itself apart from the culture, is this almost radical call to a gentleness, a humility, being patient, bearing with each other in love. It's not that ancient Greeks would have never espoused any of those qualities, but the way Paul is describing would not have looked like a strength, but a weakness. And I think, that's very much in line with Paul, though, too. You think about him being in the Roman prison. That was considered very disgraceful, right? To have to sit in a Roman prison, like that brought you way down on the totem pole. But Paul rejoiced in it. And so these are the ways that the early church is really distinguishing itself from the ancient Greek culture around them. And the other one that I thought was really interesting, and I'm just going to kind of read a bit of it to you, when it says, make the effort to keep the unity of spirit, one body, one spirit, this bond of peace. Again, in the commentary here, it says, many Jewish teachers praised the virtue of peace. Paul drives home the point by repeating one multiple times. Some Jewish texts suggested that Israel was united because God was one. These texts would never have united Jew and Gentile in one people. However, even though all the nations were admittedly joined in common humanity, Paul's language sounds closer to Stoic philosophical language about the unity of creation, but even the common Greek rhetorical theme of concord, unity, peace, does not match Paul's emphasis on the unity that believers in Jesus share and must live out. So again, there were some similarities in some of the things that Paul was saying. He wasn't saying necessarily that Gentiles were part of the Jewish nation. But he was saying, as humanity, right, as the church, we're one. And again, some of these ideas were definitely taught and espoused in ancient Greek society. But again, it says it does not match this radical emphasis that Paul had on unity. In other words, there might have been talk or ideas or virtues of peace and unity from different teachers of that day, ancient teachers or ancient philosophers. But what Paul is asking of God's people is a pretty radical thing. It was by far a much deeper emphasis than what might have been espoused in the secular culture around him. This was a high calling. One body, one faith, one Lord, one baptism, one God over all. And it makes you think, wow, this is really amazing. What a unified church they must have been. What a beautiful picture of this peaceful, united, followers of Jesus. But we know because we have read so many other parts of the New Testament and Paul's letter and Acts and things, this was actually not the case all the time. I think it's easy to sometimes look at the New Testament and think, we want to model our church after that. And now there are a lot of things about the New Testament church that I think we would do well to remember more of. But their actual working out of this unity was not this like idyllic picture. And so Paul's, I think, not saying this because they have got it all figured out, but because they don't. But again, this call again to humility, to meekness, to bearing with one another, to this beautiful unity despite so many differences, that was a radical calling compared to the culture around them. And it's a radical calling for us today, too. I think that sometimes the church can get caught up in things that divide us, and we don't always look different from the secular culture around us. And these words that Paul gave to the church, just as radical and important then as they are today. What does it look like for us to be humble and gentle and united? Does it mean we're all going to agree and get along? It really doesn't. But maybe it means that we recognize that we in humility can listen to others. I think listening is a huge part of humility. Man, do I have to work on this. I don't know about you, but the idea of just saying, okay, this person has a different view than me. It is going to go so much better if I just listen. If I hear where they're coming from, if I appreciate them as a person. And this idea of humility and listening, I think the idea of it is we're not going to all see everything the same way. Now, there are overarching truths, like, the gospel, and there are overarching truths of the gospel that we need to hold on to. But even then, it still benefits us to humbly listen to others to see where they're coming from. Because that's really what shows the love of Jesus. That's hard, isn't it? It's so hard. And even when we do agree on some overarching truths, there's still a lot of differences that I think that we have in the church, just in the general overall, big C church. But no matter what our differences, and no matter how complicated kingdom living can be, these words from Paul give us a beautiful, even radical blueprint for how we can approach such things. Humble, gentle, patient, bearing with one another in love, remembering we serve the same God. So, tell me in the comments, are there ways that you have found this to be difficult or true or challenging, or ways that you've lived this out? I would love to hear more about it. Let's keep going, friends, even when it's hard. Even when it's hard, right? To be gentle and humble and to love one another and be patient with one another. I know I need to work on it. Thanks for being here with me today, and we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.